So, in talking about agriculture, obviously we think about growing our food like produce, so fruits and vegetables and all of that good stuff. But we also need to think about animals when we talk about agriculture. So, in feedlots and rangelands, so actually raising animals for our consumption is part of agriculture as well. And a lot of what we eat from the grocery store is actually produced in a feedlot. And so, feedlot or factory farms, or we can also call them concentrated animal feeding operations because there are lots of animals um, all together in one place. And so, they are housing animals in warehouses or pens, and they are designed to deliver uh, food to their animals, living in high density. So there's lots of them, just feeding them, getting them nice and fat. So that way we can then slaughter them and eat them. And so half of the world's pork and poultry come from feedlots. So here's a picture of some poor little chickens. These would be caged eggs, so regular eggs that you would think to buy in the grocery store that don't have any other notation on them. This is how the chickens are living in a cage, just laying eggs. And so they actually will debeak these chickens, like burn their beaks off, so that they don't peck each other to death. And they just house hundreds of thousands of chickens just right on top of each other. And so, eating animal products, well, we are supplying a demand, and the demand comes with wealth and commerce. So, as the economy is doing better, people are going to consume more animal products. So, meat, milk, eggs, and over the last 40 to 50 years or so, global production has actually increased massively. And so the per capita meat consumption, how much a person is eating, has actually doubled. So here in the United States, meat is a staple of our diet, but elsewhere in the world, that is not true. A lot of societies around the world actually do not have a meat based diet. Um, there are benefits, obviously. We get to produce this food that people are going to eat. It's unavoidable in countries with high levels of meat consumption, like I said, here in the United States, because how else are we going to meet that demand? So, they also take livestock off the land, so it's reducing that footprint that they have on rangelands. So instead of deforesting an area to give us grasslands for the cows to then eat, what they're actually, they are actually packing them all really close together. And so they're reducing a footprint in that way. Drawbacks, obviously, are contributions to water and air pollution. There are all kinds of E. coli contaminations when the waste products from these animals are not treated properly or get released into local water supplies, and we end up with a outbreak of some disease like or bacteria like E. coli on our produce. And so there's poor waste containment. Like I said, it can also cause outbreaks and disease not only to us as humans, but to the animals themselves. And then due to that, we use a lot of antibiotics in this kind of area or this kind of agriculture because we need to control that disease. Otherwise, we lose our animals to disease. And so when we eat food, the energy that's in that food, we only get 10% of it. So 90% of that energy that's in our food gets lost every time you go up a trophic level. So the lower down on the food chain, um, you actually are getting more energy or more relative energy. And so, if people were to eat lower down on the food chain, you would actually end up being able to feed more people. And some animals convert grain into meat more efficiently than others. So while a a cow, if we want a kilogram of beef, it takes a lot more grain to produce that 1 kilogram. Whereas if we were to eat a kilogram of chicken, it takes a lot less. So the type of meat we're eating is actually, an environmental decision as well. So, what are the impacts of eating meat? Well, there's land and water are needed to raise this food. Producing eggs and chicken requires less space and less water because chickens don't need as much grain. And so when we choose what to eat, we're also choosing what resources are being used. So another form of agriculture is aquaculture, and this is farming fish, really. And so the world fish populations are plummeting, and so the reason why is because there's better fishing technologies and there's an increased demand for fish. So we just keep catching these fish, and so to avoid a plummet in or an overfishing in the wild populations, aquaculture is a practice that can be used and you raise aquatic organisms for food in a controlled environment. So they're often in open water pens or in land based ponds, depending on what kind of organism we're raising. And it's a huge increase in food production in aquaculture. Most of the world actually eats seafood. So this is actually a very, very important form of agriculture. And so, some benefits of aquaculture is it's a reliable source of protein. It's sustainable if it's done properly. It can reduce fishing pressure on the wild fish stock, and it's energy efficient. Drawback is there are lots of diseases that can happen, like sea lice is actually quite a big problem. But in the ponds, also, you might want to feed your fish some antibiotics if a disease breaks out in the pond itself. It can produce a large amount of waste that we then have to deal with, and farm fish may actually escape and introduce disease into the wild. One thing that I don't have on this PowerPoint is actually that um, the feed that we feed the fish a lot of times is higher up on the food chain than what the fish would eat normally, and so that actually can be an issue energy wise and resource wise. What are we actually feeding these fish that we're farming? And so, a very interesting book is a book called Four Fishes. If you're interested in it, um, a really interesting look at the four major fish stocks that we rely on as humans.